For many Jews, the Nazi Holocaust was a tremendous spiritual crisis in which some people lost their faith in God. And many theologians, Jewish theologians, for decades were having an argument about how to make sense of how God could have allowed this to happen.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
I would just love to ask you, I know that being a Christian is very important to you. How do
Hmm.
you maintain your faith in God, in the midst of this, watching it being allowed to happen? And when you talk to other Christians, in Gaza, how do they make sense of this spiritual, theologically?
I can tell you the following, my opinion theologically. The people in Gaza surprise me, Christians and Muslims alike, with their really steadfastness in faith. The fact that they just stand and they say, that's God will, and we take it no matter what. It's something that really, really, really is similar to the story of Job in the
Mm,
Hebrew Bible,
mm,
right? Where he stands and he accepts the will of God. And I would be lying if I say I'm the same. I'm not the same. I'm perhaps similar to Psalm 73, where the writer or the author looks at God and he says, God is, you are good to those who are evil, and you are bad to those who are not evil, and they're doing the good themselves, and that like myself. And that you are not really good to Israel. That's the word he starts the Psalms with. And that's how I feel, Peter. I feel that God has, in a way, betrayed us, that God hasn't really stopped what's going on. And I feel anger and I feel a sense of like really betrayal by God. And it's not an easy feeling. So that's on one level how I feel. Uh, and that leads me to think theologically. I mean, I studied theology. That was my undergrad before I switched to study politics, and makes me question all sort of concepts, as you said, about the sovereignty of God, how sovereign He is, what does it mean to have the will of God, etc. And I mean, I'm careful how to say it, but I think I am leaning more and more to theologians who don't really believe in the full sovereignty of God in a way. That's where I think my mind is going, and that's still something developed. I'm not sure if this will continue with me or not, because I am not. That's not the focus of my life now, but it's something in the background I'm thinking of. But I think the more important part and Christian element that brings comfort to someone like myself, it's the crucifixion, the resurrection of Christ. I think that's the center of Christian faith, but also from Eastern Christian point of view, the crucifixion of Christ is not about the atonement in the sense that he died to pay the price of your sins in the justice sort of thing, but rather it's empathetically more that God has died in your behalf to show you love, to show you what love means. And whenever you suffer, you can look and understand the empathy of God, and that this is sort of like a therapy to you and to your to your wounds and to your pain. And I think I tend to take this view more and more. Whenever I feel, forsaken by God, I remember that God Himself incarnated, was crucified, and then, He was resurrected to resurrect him with us. But it is difficult, and I totally understand that how the Jewish people felt. We feel the same way, and I don't want to also minimize the fact that I was in Egypt for 6 months interviewing different people from Gaza who survived the genocide. A lot of them, some were used as human shields, other were seeing their kids dying in front of their eyes, etc. And there is faith crisis among Muslims and Christians. There are people who increased their faith and became more religious, but there are many others who wonder whether God even exists or not. And I totally understand their doubts and their struggle.
mm. You mentioned earlier Hamas. How do you are very publicly critical of Hamas. How do you weigh the right balance between criticism of Hamas and criticism of Israel? I mean, I share your criticisms of Hamas, although I don't know Hamas
Mm,
as well as you do because I didn't grow up in Gaza. But I'm personally struggle to get the right balance, not because not because I think Hamas is benevolent or benign in any way, but just because there's a massive power disparity between Israel and Hamas. So even if
absolutely.
I believe that
Absolutely.
they were equally immoral, that one has 10,000 times more power than the other. So how do you figure out when you're engaged in public commentary how much time to spend focusing on the authoritarianism, the willingness to commit war crimes of Hamas versus
Mhm.
the Israel committing this genocide?
So to start with, as you said, that's what matters is to understand that there is no equality. And Hamas, in a way, is a symptom of a bigger problem that is the occupation. So by no means do I equalize or do I both sides it or whatever. My criticism of Hamas, when it's there, obviously my criticism of Israel is much more, and it goes, before that Hamas even existed. My criticism of Hamas has to do with the fact that they are, whether I like it or not, my government. Whether I like it or not, they are there. Now, if it was up to me, I would get rid of Hamas yesterday, obviously, if it's possible without violence and bloodshed, etc. I don't like them. But since they're my government, I have to deal with them as my government and hold them accountable. My critique of them also has to do with the fact that the people in Gaza see them as a problem. Today we had a protest. Yesterday we had a protest. The day before yesterday we had a protest. And to be honest, I think, like I was telling a friend this week, if I see more and more Palestinians in the West speak against Hamas, most likely I spend less time talking about Hamas because I would see someone else is covering it. But because there are not enough people talking about Hamas, I feel more responsibility. The other day when Uday al-Rabi'i was killed, who is a Palestinian, wasn't even an activist, just participated at one protest, and I think on social media he posted something against Hamas, was kidnapped and beaten to death by Al-Qassam fighters, or I call them thugs. Um, um,
To the
um,
Hamas's
that
military.
killed him. Yeah, that is Hamas's military. And I call them thugs because of the actions they commit against the Palestinian people, like Uday. They killed him while beating him up to death and dragging his body in front of Al-Quds hospital in Tel El-Hawa. When he died, I received so many messages from friends in Gaza telling me, Khalil, for God's sake, write about it in English. No one was writing about it in English. The journalists in Gaza are terrified to write about it, etc. When I receive messages like that, I feel the urge and the need to do so. The other reason why we criticize Hamas as Palestinians, because Hamas has been destructive to the national project. There is no doubt in my mind that Hamas has contributed to the Israeli right plan of wiping the Palestinians off the map. They did that in the 90s when they sent their suicide bombers during negotiation. They did that early 2000s whenever there was even conversation. They did it even harder and harder, trying to themselves replace the Palestinian Authority because that was always their goal. And at the time in the 90s, they polled in surveys less than 10%. So it's not like, oh, they're powerful, we should give them the power. No, they were less than 10%, willing to send suicide bombers, willing to commit horrific crimes in order to take power. In 2000s, they did the same. And then we've seen their role for 18 years. Authoritarian against the Palestinians in Gaza, usage of revolution and resistance to justify this authoritarianism, dragging Gaza to war every 2 years because of goals like airport and seaport, etc. We've got nothing from them. The situation keep decreasing and decreasing. And today, during this genocide, all what the Palestinians in Gaza are saying, surrender your weapons, surrender your power completely. And we know that Israel wouldn't stop. We know they are interested in our genocide. We know they're interested in our ethnic cleansing. But let's take off these excuses and let's put the war to a test. Because here's the thing, if Hamas give up all its power tomorrow and all the hostages, will happen? What likely happens is A, Israel will continue, but B, the world will wake up. I think a lot of leaders in the world, I cannot imagine a world in which the entire European and even Mr. Trump looking at Gaza and looking at what's happening in Gaza without Hamas, no hostages, no weapons, and saying, well, that's okay. I cannot envision a world in which, but Hamas is not even willing to do that. And in my mind, they say, oh, well, you will leave you defenseless. Well, aren't we defenseless right now? What is your weapons doing? Nothing. And if you give up your weapons, it takes 2 months to build them again if we needed them again. But the thing is, we don't need them. So we have a feeling that these weapons are directed at us, that these weapons that Hamas is not using today and hiding, according to all reports, Hamas is hiding weapons and not using it. It's preparing for the day after in Gaza to use it against us, against anyone who's critical of Hamas. So that's my criticism of Hamas. Does not replace the criticism of the apartheid, does not replace the criticism of the state of Israel that sponsored Hamas in the 80s and in the 70s, by the way, the Muslim Brotherhood in Gaza and those in order to divide them between the Palestinian Liberation Organization and the rest of Palestinians.